but they're an international design agency that is basically creating a lot of digital design, but also some physical products. And it's a very interesting agency we've written about a little bit recently and look forward to writing about more. And I'll let Reuben introduce his panel. Reuben Steiger.
Hi, everyone. So thanks for the introduction. And we're going to try to live up to the billing and talk about some interesting things. So with us today, we have some interesting folks. Why don't you introduce yourself and give, respectively, a little bit of an overview of who you are and what you think about.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeremy. Oh, I noticed we don't have a complete listing. We have an incomplete list. All right, I'm at the bottom there. Jeremy O'Brien. I head Kinetic Futures, which is a think tank incubated by Kinetic. We produce foresight on, I guess you could call it the big church of out-of-home. So we look at things like mobile computing, urban development, and the future of marketing practice. And we generally, if I had to summarize our work, I'd say we typically examine the interplay of human behavior, the proliferation of things like data and ubiquitous computing, and advances in media surfaces and mobile technologies around the world, generally on a 3 to 10 year time scale. So long-term stuff.
Great. My name is Ryan Lal, director of D-Theory, which is the newest group to come out of Omnicom Media Group. We created a whole new brand to work very closely with our traditional at-home groups, OMG and OMA, to focus not only on the execution of digital out-of-home, but also the overarching strategy and client development, client education. I wish that my timelines were 3 to 10 years. They're a little bit shorter than that, but we certainly keep our finger on the pulse and we see what's out there, but we're far more executional in terms of a day-to-day process.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Brill. I'm the interactive director at a company called Implied Sciences. We are sort of a skunk works. We do some of the harder problems for a lot of agencies in the city around designing new kinds of displays, designing new kinds of interactive software, and designing new kinds of sensors. So we do a lot of work with Kinect. We do a lot of work with 3D sensing. My partner, who runs the hardware side of the group, was responsible for engineering a lot of the displays in Times Square, the underlying hardware components. So we're sort of more on the doer side of this, the equation here.
My name is Josh Coppell, and I am the co-founder of Scroll Motion, which is a platform for bringing content of all different types, shapes, and sizes to iPads and iPhones and Android devices. We power Esquire magazine, Oprah magazine. We do work for GE, their annual report and other things. We make kids' books and textbooks and magazines. But we're finding a lot of real interest in our product in the enterprise space because we're seeing tons of iPhones and iPads coming to the enterprise as a replacement for laptops and computers. And so we've built a end-to-end publishing solution that allows people to make content, distribute content, secure content of all different shapes and sizes and imaginations.
Excellent. So thank you, guys. So as we were talking hurriedly outside about what the best way to think about this panel was, one of the things that occurred to us was that there's a current debate about what digital out-of-home actually is, what qualifies, and obviously what to measure. And one of the, as sort of a futures panel, one of the models we threw up was the movie Minority Report painted a picture of, sometime 30 years in the future, what the world would look like from an advertising perspective and from a content perspective. You would have very receptive surfaces, retinal scanning, messages that were personalized to you wherever you went, gestural computing, things that we've seen now coming out for Microsoft Kinect, which was the fastest growing device in consumer electronics history. And we're seeing, obviously, all of these very innovative consumer products begin to bleed out into other environments. So one of the questions I'd like to put to the panel is, if we think about them as arrayed from end to end, as 10 years out down to worrying about tomorrow. Let's start with Josh. What impact are you seeing scroll interfaces having on how people think about creating content?
Well, I think what's so exciting about this moment in time is we went from essentially a world where music and movies and games were the only thing that were living on small screen devices to a world where every single piece of content in the world lives in this space. And a new interface like touch has completely changed the notion of what it's like to interact with print media. I mean, if you think about walking into a Barnes & Noble, every single type of, every bookshelf in that store has been essentially, there's been a step forward on interface for everything, from the kids' book section to the magazine section to the even the computer books, right, are all suddenly have taken us a leap forward. And our job is to imagine how that content lives best in all these experiences. And I mean, from the problems of solving those problems, you have multiple multiple operating systems, and trying to deal with how to consistently bring the best experience across a wide range of devices. But I think that we're also about to take that same leap into the workspace, right, where every single thing you do in your job that used to live on paper is now living on these devices, and how to best make those things live both as an individual, as a person talking to a room of people, as two colleagues working together. All these problems are happening right now before our eyes, and it's a very exciting moment to be a part of.
So I think I'll just flip it back to the more theoretical, not to typecast you as the theoretical, Jeremy. When you see one of the discussions we had beforehand was about, I think, what you called gimmickry. So when we look into the future, we see a lot of very cool things are happening, but right here in the here and now, a lot of these coolest things are also, interactivity for interactivity's sake. And it begs the question: what's the ROI on some of the bells and whistles, cool experiences coming out? Based on what you're seeing, what are the most effective deployments going on that are also very cool in the out-of-home space?
So let me get this straight. You're asking me about today?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, as I've been typecast as the theorist, I'll stick to theory. However, I think it will illuminate a point of view. I hope it will illuminate a point of view, and that is that interactivity is fundamental to the way many consumers are appreciating media today, out of the home, in the home, wherever. It doesn't really matter. But the point you made on gimmickry is that the design of interactivity into experiences needs to be integral. You can't simply add a kind of a reactive element to an execution and expect that to be meaningful, really, in the fullness of time. And so working basically from your business objectives or communication objectives to understand what can meaningfully be created for someone who interacts with, what can meaningfully be created in an experience for someone, and looking at whether interactivity should play a role in that, I think, is the right way to go about this. Now, we were talking a little bit earlier about, did kind of an audit of some purportedly interactive campaigns, digital and static in some of them, a number of months ago. And one of the most interesting that came through was a campaign that it became apparent in looking at it immediately, it wasn't actually interactive. I won't get into the particulars of it. But
Actually,
shall we?
yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
all right. Well, I think it was for ASICs, but I could be terrible. I'm very, very bad at remembering who's who. I think it was for ASICs. It was a digital screen, which was placed in, I believe, the transit system. And it displayed full motion video. And it displayed a marathon runner. I forget his name as well. I'm terribly bad at those things. So. And it would show him, there was a countdown, and it would show him doing a run at his regular marathon pace, and folks who were viewing it could challenge themselves, right? And in fact, many people did. They'd look at it and they'd try to keep pace with a marathon runner. Now, nothing about that campaign was actually interactive. It was entirely performative, and that was very interesting. But it wasn't actually interactive. There was no feedback loop. There was no data collection. It was just an experience which people could participate in. That's fascinating to us.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
By the way, that's not one of ours. It was just a campaign we saw.
so that was a plug-free reference.
Yeah.
Bravo. So rare. So with respect to this point of feedback loop, this has got to be, Ryan, very important to your business with respect to, a campaign deployment. It's sold in, and then especially when something's innovative, there's obviously that conversation afterwards of how did it do. How are you viewing that these days?
Yeah, it's really an excellent point because I think, and what might be more relevant from a time perspective of people in this room is we see there's a lot of talk about, deploying new technology in the out-of-home space and how that's growing and helping the industry to evolve. And I think that's very important. But more often than not, these types of campaigns, like the ASICS campaigns, are really, their lifespan on the street is short. It's 2 weeks, it's 4 weeks, it's 8 weeks on the long side. And, way clients are judging that, I don't think the analytics are quite there yet. I think we're going to get there, and I think that's, maybe a topic for the next futurist panel is, let's get to incorporating analytics into digital out-of-home, but or real-time optimization analytics, but so oftentimes the client is just happy with the PR response or the buzz that maybe lives for an additional 2 weeks beyond whatever that campaign lived on the street. That is enough currency for them to want to do that again. And we did something very cool, and we can hang our hats on that. What our challenge is yes, we want to certainly promote and encourage that kind of thinking and that kind of behavior with our clients, but ultimately, I think the true power will be bringing scale to these types of executions, not doing it in just one single transit station with one, execution that got, maybe a few hundred people to, race a marathon runner. But how do we deploy that across, how do we deploy that nationally? How do we step into the ring with some of the other, media disciplines and say, now we can do some things that are very cool that other media disciplines cannot do, and we can do it on a national scale. And then as analytics improve, we can start to look at, now we can talk about real ROI, we can talk about real campaign results from respect of, yes, we did something cool using new display technology or new interactivity technology, and now we also have measurement to back that up. And by the way, we also did it, we reached, a few million people, not a few hundred.
If I may, one of the things that was very interesting about the campaign we just talked about was the fact that it was also, not only was it participatory, but it was collective. It's something you can enjoy with a number of people, and many experiences are. That is the character of many experiences that are meaningful in our lives. And I think that's something that we shouldn't forget about when we're thinking about, when words like addressability come up. Displays are typically oriented at more than one. Digital out-of-home is heterogeneous, right? That's one of the challenges of talking about it, is there's so many different use cases, there's so many different applications. But one of the, I guess, a premise that's fairly sound is that it's a one-to-many medium. It's a broadcast medium. So when you start talking about things like addressability or personalization, it kind of begs the question, what role should displays in our environments play in that regard? And that was kind of one of the elements of the Minority Report narrative that was kind of burned into our collective unconscious. It's this idea that Ethan Hunt, or whatever his name was, I think that's the other one.
Yeah, pretend you don't remember his exact name.
But the idea that he could be identified and that messages which would be personalized for him on the fly, right? And this is something that sometimes gets talked about when you discuss, what did you, we call them AVA, Anonymous Video Analytics, companies like Intel and others. I think you called it earlier, retinal eye scanning or whatever technology. Basically those sorts of technologies, is to what extent should that inform the generation of content, whatever device it's being delivered.
So it's a really, really interesting point. So what you're actually, if I can play it back, what I'm hearing you say is that traditionally digital out of home has been conceived of as a one-to-many media experience, and what makes it out of home is where it's seen, right? So an elevator is not in the home, right? Therefore, it's digital out of home. If you were going to think about personalizing that, you can personalize based on what you know demographically or geographically, psychographically about a home, a viewer, a time slot. But if you were to blow that up and say, hey, we're doing a national deployment, and these media experiences are going to be in Times Square, to take it down to the level of granularity of how do we customize messages, is something that doesn't really fit that model.
It might not, but there is, I mean, it's something that should be debated. I think what's interesting is to think about what role another screen, presently a screen anyway, plays in the personalization of information and content for people. And that's the ones we bring about with us all the time. And what role that can play in conjunction with the information we receive from the environment around us via signage and displays and things like that. What are the respective roles for those information conduits, if you want to call it, if you want to get very abstract? How can they play together, and where don't they play together?
So, so to pull it back a little, I think at this point, we're only beginning to get geeky, but I'd also like to try to make this, in order to make this cohesive, I'm going to try to pull back and pull out a theme or two. So there are these catchphrases that are getting a lot of hype right now. Gestural computing. The tagline for Microsoft's Kinetic is, "You are the interface," which was very compelling to me because I can never use those video devices, but I do know how to swing my arm. Augmented reality, this idea that, you know, Google goggles has gotten a lot of press recently. Most people are thinking of this as, I hold my cell phone up to the real world and I get extra information. Another one, which is quantified self. So something that something I wear knows all the time what I'm doing, and regardless of where I am, it helps me do something I want to do. Get thinner, make better decisions about X, Y, or Z. And then really the last one that I think is a big trend here is I think a nice thing we can draw back to this conference, which is this idea that all the world's a screen, the spring issue of Media Magazine. So what I think is interesting that we should discuss is how do marketers, if messaging is going on everywhere, how do you think of digital out of home as something that you can integrate within these emerging larger scale movements? You know, as consumers are getting used to gestural computing through gaming or touch interfaces because everyone wants an iPhone, what are the pragmatic applications?
Well, I think there are a couple of questions embedded in your question. which
I hope
is the first of which we go through our clients with our clients all the time. You know, they come to us and they say, well, we want something like Minority Report, or we want something like with Connect in it, or we want something with an iPad. Those are sort of the top three first statements we get on a phone call. And the first question we ask is, what's your objective? Are you trying to create some sort of iconic experience people will remember? Are you trying to leapfrog a step in your sales process where people are dropping off? Where what's the objective? And the thing that gestural computing does, and the thing that you were talking about, personalized sensors, and all of these things do, is they allow, for the first time, us as marketers to engage with the customer, to say, oh, you're near the screen. Okay, you're looking at the screen. How can we customize the message to that? Or how can we customize the message when people aren't looking at the screen to make sure that we're getting more eyeballs on it? And I think that first step of getting attention onto the display, onto whatever the message is that you're selling, is the number one thing that does. The second key piece you were talking about was quantified self. This idea that we have sensors not just in the environment, but on us. You know, what that allows to happen, potentially, near field communication, all these things you'll be hearing about sort of coming out in the next year, what they allow to have happen is a two-way communication between your screen and me as a user, and information I'm not even aware about currently. So, you know, what's my heart rate? Well, if I'm really excited about something, my heart rate goes up. Yeah, that's a really good thing to know as a marketer. So you can start to customize the speed, the pacing of messaging, the intensity of messaging, the specificity of it based on these very simple metrics, like are people looking at the thing? Are they leaning forward toward it? Are they, you know, ideally if they give you information, you know, is their heart beating a little faster? You know, are they excited? You know, how do you manage the stress level in a sales environment? And how do you automate that? Those are really cool things that are going to start to be possible, I think, a lot sooner than we all think. I mean, we're talking about a 5-year window when this will all start to become pretty legit and everybody will have these sorts of sensors.
Yeah, that's really an excellent point, because what this is doing now is putting an enormous amount of power in, you know, a marketer's hands, and it's giving them a lot of technology that they can work with that they don't understand, and at the rate at which the consumer adoption level is growing, it's outpacing what some marketers are, outpacing some marketers and what they understand. So, you know, it gets to a point where we work with our clients very closely in saying, listen, there are a lot of new technologies, and more importantly, there are a lot of new unique environments that you can have a dialogue with a consumer where you've never had this opportunity before. It's so important that you understand what that consumer is thinking. You know, what you might be saying to someone in a mall is something completely different than you might want to say to them in a gas station, or what you want to say to them in an elevator. It's really important that, you know, we help our clients or advertisers understand, you know, what you should be saying to a consumer in a particular environment, helping them understand that consumer mindset in that environment.
I would just add, from a tactical point of view, that yes, there is so much opportunity to make great stuff. But at the same time, if you're not focused, if you're not really, really clear about what your objectives are and what the experience is, it's also incredibly easy to fail. And in this world, you know, you have to be very careful that your execution is something that you actually feel comfortable going with. That as marketers, that even though you're not the demographic necessarily that you're trying to reach, you are a user of the product. You are engaged with the experience, and that if it's not working for you personally, you have to make sure that you're changing and altering, you know, making sure that it's an experience that you're comfortable with, and that because usability, because we're now in this world where we're used to Angry Birds, we're used to reactive, we're used to things that are actually really quite impressive and amazing, and the successful ones have a great sense of usability. So if you're making stuff and you feel like it is not living up to that level, it is more damaging to put stuff into the world than it is to wait and readjust.
So I'll give a little, I think I've turned off my mic. No, I'm just not speaking into it. So one of the ways that at the company I'm working at now, we've begun to try to think about these big issues is sort of comes from the idea that from a user's perspective, they don't care about any of these categories. A user couldn't care less about augmented reality or, now I'm using a gestural interface or I'm part of the quantified self movement. When it comes to the relationship between a company and a consumer, all they care about is their experience, right? So we try to think of, well, how do you deliver an experience? And we think of it as a combination of product, service, and brand. So a product is what you're trying to sell. It's the stuff that users like. Service is your ongoing relationship with them, whether they're in the elevator or using their phone to interact with your financial service or pay their phone bill. And brand is everything they expect from you. When you're Apple, I can identify Apple product without even blinking an eye. There's a million expectations I have of Apple, and anytime they deviate from it, I know. And that model is it's a decent way of thinking about, I hope, how to treat media without siloing it. As practitioners, you probably hear, that sounds like the ideal, I would hope, but what I've observed, and I'd love to get your reaction on, is, okay, that's great. What gets in the way of that thinking when you're planning a campaign?
Okay. There are a number of things that get in the way. A lot of times campaigns suffer from having too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many people. A lot of times it's conflicting creative concepts, and a lot of times or more often than not, it's whether it be internally in the client side or internally at the agency side, people fighting over dollars and where they're allocated. And I think that's a really, harsh truth for a lot of us in this room, where we have, all the common sense in the world, and you come up with an idea that makes all the most sense for a brand. You're sold in this mall. You should put an ad right outside. Something that's so simple, something that the most common person, something that would probably make sense to an everyday consumer, we balk at because we think it's either too simple or it gets caught up in some kind of, agency dialogue or client dialogue or some minutia. It's just like, no, you know what? 30-second spots on broadcast have done it for us traditionally, and that's what works. Why should we deviate from that? We've been showing steady 3 to 5% growth doing that, and they're afraid to take the leap and do something else where they might fail, or there might be some growing pains over the first 18 months, but then they could see, monumental growth, beyond that 5% and the 10%, 20% range, doing something that is a lot more tailored, or something that makes sense, using new technology, using different media formats as part of the media mix.
I'd say there are a couple of other things we run into more on the, as a group that does both content development and technology development. The first is this desire to have something new and to have the impact of a new iconic experience, and for it to be just like something that was seen on YouTube yesterday, because that's what can be sold up the ladder. That's a really hard sort of thing to set of expectations to manage. The second is with interactive experiences, they're by nature in the moment. They happen once you've built the software, and it's really hard to completely visualize what the thing will be like until it's been prototyped. And so getting into that prototype phase very early in the development process, so that everybody, all of the stakeholders can buy into what the thing is, I think is really critical, and it's very different than how traditional outdoor media buying happens, where it's, you know, a lot of creative concept happens, and then you figure out where you're going to put it. So that piece of just putting 5% of the budget or 10% of the budget to create some kind of an experience of what the interaction is going to be before you start, instead of when you're in production, is critical.
I'll even get more tactical. I'm working constantly with big brands that are trying to move their materials to an iPad so that when someone walks into a room, they can have a really engaging way of, you know, talking to a potential customer. And assets are so crucial here that some people think that they can just give you a PDF and it'll just magically work inside this experience, and that if you're trying to take a PDF and just put it into this experience, you're going to be disappointed, and that the opportunity is to not totally deviate from the materials you have, but to build small little, what we call wow moments, moments that take advantage of the new form factor in a way that's exciting. What we call a scroll motion or a tap interaction or video used in a novel way or 3D elements, that when you're deciding to do this process of even bringing the most basic things into these new form factors, you have to realize that you're going to be creating new assets on some level too, and that simply trying to move from one medium to another without really considering all the different things that are going to help the person that's using this thing in context really are going to make a difference.
So I don't want to run out of time here. When do we have till, Joe?
Yeah, 10 more minutes if you wanted to turn to questions.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Questions? I have one. So, I mean, this is my favorite stuff because it is science fiction coming to reality. And one of my questions is, like, how much of what you do is art, life imitating art? But the other thing is, I just want to pick up on what you said about wow moments, because one of the things I'm hearing a lot about is that we're training consumers and society to expect more and more of a rush, you know, and that we're triggering higher and higher dopamine effect orders, you know, with media experiences. Do you guys think we'll ever burn out? That, you know, because we've grown up watching Minority Report, and now we can actually see it in every physical retail environment we go in. I mean, where can you go? Where's the upside to what you can do with this?
I think it's Moore's Law, right? I think that every 18 months, the amount of dopamine that our brains produce it increases. I mean, like, just think about the history of the world. Think about when stained glass windows were the high visual world that you were living in, or Charles Dickens, you know, serialized novels were it was the height of interactive media, in the sense that every month you got another one. Or Dick Van Dyke. I mean, the history of entertainment and of interaction with entertainment is that it continues to evolve. It continues to get better. I mean, Connect is such a novel idea. It is such a new world of interaction with technology that it just continues to evolve. And children continue to grow up in worlds where they did not know what black and white was, and essentially the brain evolves. So I don't think that we are going to get into a place where we stop, the dopamine drip stops.
Yeah, I think we also give consumers, the average consumer, a little bit more credit, because, you know, from a strictly marketing or advertising perspective, you know, I'm sure majority of people don't know that they're already being served ads on, you know, through the web based on their search habits. You know, Google Analytics is doing that and serving ads, you know, based on, you know, what web pages you search. So I think it's, you know, they kind of just see, like, oh, I guess, you know, I buy from Nike. It's weird. I guess they just have a campaign and they're serving me stuff now. I think we give consumers a lot more credit. They don't really know everything that's going on beyond, you know, with not being in the industry and getting the, you know, the constant, you know, what's next.
I think there's another piece to this, which is a lot of the sensing that you're talking about, that drives and enables the out-of-home media that we're talking about here, also drives the ability to focus that media so that you aren't getting information that's not relevant to you, not only as a person, as a demographic, but in that moment. so we can start to serve content that's contextually appropriate. And I think that's the end game, is highly targeted messages that are super high value. And that's where we're going to be 10 years from now. At least that's what I'm working toward.
If I could just follow up on what Josh said, I thought that was really interesting. Do you think that that's going to create wear out for more static, less dynamic media, that what you're doing with iPads will kill magazines? I guess a lot of people are predicting that already, but you know what I'm saying?
I mean, will it kill the magazines? I think it pushes the magazines to be more conscious of the type of products that they're producing and the types of places where they're reaching consumers. I think it's really interesting right now. There's a campaign going on for paper. You know, it's like a little kid and it says, paper. It's just better to learn on paper. And like, I just find that, or the magazine, there's a huge magazine campaign that was happening. I think it was like $75 million spent by the magazines to be like, magazines. Pretty good, huh? I mean, like, I feel like, you know, new technology forces old technologies to up their game, right? To engage in a way that is where they're forced to be as relevant as they possibly can be. I think that, you know, and the other thing I think about this is that the new technology is always considered the popcorn of its time. When television happened, television was considered to be, you know, the low base common denominator. Film was the great thing. And now, with the web, I think TV has become much more focused on being art. Like, I think shows like, you know, like the Mad Men's and the Sopranos and, you know, the whole range of television that is now basically our novels. It's the common man's novel, these long, epic television shows. I think that the same is really going to happen with paper-based content, where it's really forced to change its context, change its meaning, become as relevant as it possibly can be in its space.
Are we talking about static paper?
No, I'm just saying that the more we escalate...
But, I mean, this is a question to ask, right? I mean, the evolution of media, whether it's print, whether it's broadcast. I mean, years ago, there was something you could call broadcast. Now, what are agencies calling it? Video?
Video.
Yeah, video, exactly. So it kind of begs these more fundamental questions. What is this providing for people? And I just would like to, I don't know if I'm disagreeing with anyone, but I do think there is a limit, a cognitive load limit, or whatever you want to call it, for human beings. But the ways that people experience information and take information are evolutionarily determined. So really the question I think that's more interesting to me is, just because we can do it, should we do it? And
I think we're, you know, if I was going to invest dollar for dollar right now in anything, I'd put my money in media rehab facilities. But because people, yeah, are getting cracked out on, you know, their social network. There is a capacity for overload, and I think people, you know, I guess we call it spas or vacations, but you know.
Experiences in media should be designed with that in mind, and I think we find that the good ones are, and that the good platforms and technologies also take that into account, that the human is at the center of the interaction with technology, not the other way around. And I think that's what's most interesting about when we talk about interface technologies. It's not, ooh, look, I can wave my hands and do this. It's that you don't really need to think about it. You can do things in a way that is more appropriate to the limitations of your, you know, corporeal self, whatever it is. You know?
Yeah, and while consumers certainly, you know, they might not know what's going on the back end or how we're designing, you know, the way things look in front of them, but there's certainly, we can all agree, I think technology is empowering them a lot more and allowing them to choose, and I think ultimately, you know, the public and consumers will dictate at what pace, you know, we, you know, deploy technology in the media world.
Any questions? Okay. I think we expired the dopamine effects of the audience, so.
Hey, so thank you guys.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.